there's these land grabs that are going on that under the Biden administration is the first thing he started putting the puzzle pieces into place is by 2030, 30% of U.S. land will be under federal jurisdiction. By 2050, the plan is to have 50% of U.S. land, private-owned land, under federal jurisdiction, which is the basis of Marxism. It's the abolition of private property. That means we no longer drive the government as the people. We no longer steer the apparatus of government. But to stay on point, we're moving into this world where all the information we've accrued is unavoidable, which means it's like there's a fight happening in the house and the kids can't avoid it. So they hear every little part of it. But there's also joy and beauty, and there's realness in that argument that we're all coming face to face with. You cannot avoid what's happening with Israel and Palestine, Ukraine and Russia. You can't avoid all the stuff that's happening all around the world. It's in your face. So what I believe the new story is, and I'll get to my part in it, but what I believe the new story is that's building is it's no longer up to elites or small factions of people to decide major movements of how the world or nations should be run. It's inevitable. What I think the liberal democratic experiment of the United States became was inevitably the peasants back in the day who looked at the king, they were like, I want my children in the future to live like that. Well, now we all live far better than the kings did back then, and we still have a lot of problems because we're waking up to ourselves. We're realizing that living like a king does not mean you are living in king energy or queen energy as well. So I think what that means is we are starting to, thanks to technology and thanks to not being able to avoid the empirical wisdom that's been accrued, we are using that as a mechanism by which we integrate ourselves back into the whole story, the holistic story. And it's not quite cosmic yet. We're just talking about geocentric. You know, the geocentric story, we're trying to embed ourselves back into nature. So we realize the whole thing is an organism, right? There's no such thing as throwing your trash away, right? Somebody is downstream. So that is an accountability as a species we have not had to really face yet. So the new story is accountability for that which we haven't needed to be accountable for yet. What does that sound like if I were to say that's not a species but a human? At what point does a human start really facing that?
When their desires for hedonistic and or selfish living can't continue anymore. I think that's where we'd have to pause and reflect.
Yeah. If I were to put it into a developmental stage, I would say this is maybe past the point of puberty. You know, that's where we can start having babies and we start like sending people out into the world, which is going to have a big impact. And we embed those people with our stories and all our shadow and everything like that. But I think when a child starts to realize that their actions have consequences, they start realizing they have to be accountable to it, even if they shy away from it. We as a species are hitting that point. And I don't know if you've heard Michio Kaku and other people, they talk about type 0 through type 3 civilizations.
No.
Well, a type 0 civilization is us. We haven't even learned to properly harness the power of the planet. Type 1 civilization is when you properly learn how to harness the power of a planet without producing all these negative costs like pollution and stuff like that. Type 2 civilization is when you harness the energy of a star and you can travel the cosmos like that. Type 3 civilization is where you harness the 0-point energy that is just inherent all around us. And I think Terrence McKenna even said this on that video clip where he's out in nature and he's saying, I just think it's going to get weirder and weirder and weirder. And he's like, this is what happens. All this crazy stuff that you see in the world. And I think if he would have had the language, he would have said all the, the woke stuff, all the way down to the extremist right, fundamentalist, Christian nationalist, all the stuff that we would say is the craziest thing in the world. This is what seems to happen to a species as they are about to go type 1, from type 0 to type 1. We experiment. We try new things. We're in our adolescent phase. We're going to go out and we're going to make a lot of mistakes. But the new story is truly where we start understanding that we have a role, because I am an agent, that my actions change the causal structure of the universe. I have to be accountable to that. Nobody else can be. And in a way, they're going to hold me accountable for my actions. So now we're congealing together as a globalized species held together by information transfers of technium. We're starting to understand that our actions have impact. So for me, because I truly believe that's what's next for humanity, how do I make the transition into it smoother? And how do I empower people to not shy away from the pain or shy away from their shadow, but actually bring it up to the surface and willingly experience the pain of accountability for all that we've done, but also all that we are connected to having been done. We're a part of a species that seems to be destroying the planet. A lot of us feel that. We really do feel that, but there's a lot of us that don't. We just live in our happy little bubble. How's that world going to get rocked? It's not going to be me knocking on their door and it's like, hey, can you take a little bit more accountability for the things, that for what's happening in Bangladesh? And
yes.
No. So my role is to make films. And if you go back and you look at any of my films, any of my content whatsoever, even back into the music that I used to make, it had a darker shadow edge to it. I would talk about conspiracy, but I would do so in a way that was leading to the end, which was always a twist ending, and that was always something super empowering. And once you have your world rocked and you see, like, a lot of people, they feel good with conspiracy because they're like, oh, all that depression that I feel, it's not my fault, it's their fault. And I'm like, you can't pass the buck. Accountability is on you. So my job as an artist is literally to help build the bridge of the story, the old story that we're in, to the new story, so we can actually mature as a species and go type 1 and actually travel interdimensionally. We can travel out into the cosmos. We can actually get to the next step of where I think Technium wants to take us. And that's to bridge between not just here in the earth, but the greater part of the split off parts of self, which is the cosmos, other dimensions that are existent right here that you only touch when you do 5 grams of mushrooms or a large DMT hit, and you can plunder the palace. That is my role. And that's why art has always been the number one for me. And that's why I'm even making a film course right now to teach people story, but it's called The Soul of Filmmaking. Because I don't care if people know how to do impact blurs and these kinds of transitions and cuts, and I want them to understand the fundamentals of storytelling because we're already doing it. We're doing a clumsy job when we don't know ourselves, which is all part of the story. But the more we can introduce each other to who we are in this cosmic story through the use of story itself, I think the smoother the transition between the old cymatic pattern into that chaos period, which we're in, this fourth turning, into the next higher frequency, the pattern that we're stepping into. So my role is to start telling the new stories, and people will feel the resonance. They will just feel the resonance. As any story that you've ever heard that's just like, oh man, I feel that. Where does that feeling exist? How does it resonate? Where inside you does it resonate? Sometimes it resonates inside you in a place, but oftentimes you're swimming in it. You're like, man, that was exactly what I needed to hear. And I'll end on something that might seem very trivial, but after 2020, when the right started gaining a lot of steam because the left started looking very crazy, I was very disappointed in comedians. Not just the comedians on the left that would get up and start, using shaming, but the comedians on the right that, they took that bifurcation and they stood firmly on that other side. Have you seen Anthony Jeselnik? Dude, he's on Netflix. And one of my favorite moments was when he showed to me in one joke exactly what was bothering me about the right and their, let's say, their mouthpieces, all the comedians and all the artists that are kind of like building the ethos story of the right. And he just stopped in the middle of a skit and he said, I hate cancel culture. And a bunch of people started cheering. And he said, yeah, that's my impression of a shit comic trying to get on Joe Rogan. Right. And the thing that I found so funny about that was it's so true. There were all these comedians that I love that started like trying to get on Rogan by way of like kind of virtue signaling with this whole cancel culture thing. And he's bringing it back down to the dark comedy of it all. It's like he even said this one thing about thoughts and prayers. That's the name of one of his whole skits.
Yes.
Where he was like, you know, when the Boston Marathon bombing happened and all these tragedies happened and people are like, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers. He's like, listen, I don't make jokes about those kinds of events because I'm making fun of the victims. I'm making fun of the people who are like thoughts and prayers, which is basically like saying, don't forget about me. I know there's a lot of stuff going on out there that's taking your attention, but don't forget about little old me. I'm sad too. And I think there's something in that beyond what's funny about it, but the funniness, the ability to laugh at something like that is like, you know, when you laugh, it's very close to crying and there's this erratic breathing pattern that really is like that exhale. It's like letting go of something. It's like we're holding on to this false part of a story that when somebody can put it very succinctly in a joke and make us laugh, that's truth in a moment. To me, that is truth in a moment. That's like, oh, now I see why even the side that I championed for a while is a little bit ridiculous or is going a little bit too far. Or that's the one I'm concerned with now as we move forward. Because I'll just end on this. The thing that I feel everyone's talking about is this civil war and all this polarity and all this division. But another thing that's very much so helping the division and the polarity are all the people talking about all the division and the polarity. There is something beautiful underneath the kind of argument that we're stuck in between the left and the right that I think instead of trying to point the fingers at either of the sides, we need to see what is the story underneath it that both are fighting over. Let's drill down into the pieces of it because they're all our brothers and sisters, and you don't have to love, you know, and share space with every single one of them. Yeah. But what are we fighting for? Why did MLK hug that person that was attacking him? Because it shows you, it's not as simple as you think it is. There's a middle way, and that middle way is. I may not let you, come up with a hatchet and just hatchet me while I try and hug you. But if you're just going to tackle me, I'll hug you. I'll send that message. I'll use this message, this symbol, to show it to the world. Like, I'll take some pain to show that I'm not worried about the pain. What I'm worried about is us not getting real with ourselves about the core or the source of where all the pain is truly coming from.
Whoa. If you enjoyed that one you just saw, you will love this one on the screen. Click it and enjoy.